All right, welcome back to Old Testament Survey, everybody. We're still in the history books section of the Old Testament canon. And remember, these books sort of show the tension that exists for the people of Israel between obedience and disobedience. You know, will they obey God and have that positive influence on the nations for blessing and goodness? Or will they disobey God and do just the opposite? So we already looked at the book of Joshua, which is mostly a positive book and shows the people obeying God and taking over the land and God giving them that wonderful gift and a place to live out their redemptive purpose. But the book of Judges is pretty much the exact opposite. And it just shows the people of Israel's failure to obey God. And in the end, rather than having a blessing on the nations and the Canaanites, the Israelites, for all intents and purposes, become like the Canaanites. And the influence goes in the opposite direction. So let me just give you a very brief overview of this book, and then you'll do some other reading and watch some videos to get into the content. But let's not forget the story so far. We always have to keep in mind this big overarching story of the Old Testament. So there's creation and human sin, and it gets worse. And then in Genesis 12, God calls Abraham and his family and gives them the commission of being a blessing to the nations. Then the people of Israel, this nation, God rescues them from Egypt. He makes a covenant with them at Mount Sinai. He gives them the law so that they can live holy lives and attract the nations to faith in God. He tells them that they're going to be a whole nation of priests, go-betweens or mediators. They're going to teach the Torah and they're going to lead the nations in worship. This is God's missionary purpose. And then God gives Israel the gift of the land, a place where they can live out that redemptive purpose. And remember, the land is right in the middle of everything. They're going to interact with the nations and hopefully have a positive influence. But there's a problem. And the problem is that the nation of Israel, while they are the bearers of God's solution to the sin problem, they are also the carriers of the problem and the disease. Because Israel itself needs rescuing from their sin. And this book of Judges shows the terrible failure of the people of Israel as they give in to that evil and sin. It's a very, very sad book that demonstrates Israel's failure. They are not a holy nation. And for all intents and purposes, they become like Canaanites and live like them. These are the 6 major judges that are talked about in this book. And there is a sort of a deterioration from bad to worse to absolute chaos. And you can see this goes on for about 350 years in Israel's history, and by the end of that 350 years, there is moral degeneration where the people of Israel have descended into chaos. The theme verse of the book of Judges appears several times, and this is the verse. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. Israel had no king. They had no leader, and this is what they need. They need a leader. They need a king, somebody who can bring that positive influence and lead them in communicating the values of God and living out those values. A king who would defeat their enemies and usher in a period of goodness and blessing. What they need is a competent leader. But for 350 years, they didn't have that. Now, the various judges in the book are military leaders, and they do bring deliverance and salvation from God, and that, of course, shows God's grace in rescuing his people time and again. But none of these judges are the real competent leader that the people of Israel need. So since they have no competent leader, that contributes to this descent into moral chaos. So, the purpose of the book of Judges really is twofold. It shows the terrible human failure because human beings are infected with evil and sin. Israel is infected, and they need rescuing just like everybody else. So it shows the terrible influence of sin. But this book also shows God's wonderful grace. God sends these judges, these leaders, although they don't have very good moral character themselves, but nevertheless, they're leaders, and they rescue God's people, and God sends his Spirit upon these leaders to bring about rescue and redemption. And it just shows God's unwavering commitment to this mission, to use the people of Israel to bring blessing to the nations, to fix the sin problem that happened in the Garden of Eden and beyond, and to bring about that relationship and that intimacy between God and human beings. So that's kind of a broad overview of the book. You're going to watch another video and do a little bit of reading to get a little bit more into the content of this book of Judges.